This is an abbreviated version of our sailing away story with my glamorous assistant here on the pictures. This is the story of the trip which led to Sail Away. So we're going to travel swiftly through an 8-year voyage of discovery, through 25,000 sailing miles, 2 hurricanes, lightning storms and idyllic anchorages, through France, the Caribbean, the US eastern seaboard and the Bahamas. In our late 30s, John and I took the decision to leave the rat race and sail away into a life less ordinary. We anticipated being away for maybe 18 months. It was 8 years, with 2 years off for babies. We had no idea how hard this would be, and we'd virtually no sailing experience. We were working in London, not far from here actually. I gatecrashed what I thought was an art gallery opening and was met at the door by a man whose first words were, "You haven't been invited." Over our first dinner, we discussed how we were fed up with advertising and TV. We'd had enough of the rat race. John wanted to do something crazy like sail around the world. 3 months later, we were engaged and booking sailing courses and looking for a boat. We found a 35-foot westerly corsair called Moonshine. The next day, my whole department was made redundant. It was time to go. Conveniently, my redundancy money paid for the refit. Day by day, this dream over dinner was becoming a reality. John resigned from his company. We rented my flat and John's house. Our wedding list was at a chandlery. One friend who flew club class over the Atlantic bought us a pilot guide for crossing the Atlantic. Others bought us an emergency bailing pump and then decided we would probably need a set of wooden bungs to go with it. I wrote about our wedding list for my first article for Yachting Monthly, which was the editor called "For Wetter or Worse."
I'm hearing from the technical department that we could hear you better if we turned it on.
Oh, yes, that would possibly. Okay, is that on?
Yep.
Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Okay. 10 months after we met, we were married. The wedding had a sailing theme, and there were some people who were there. The marquee poles had hessian wrapped around them, with palm leaves at the top and coconuts to make palm trees. John's dinghy was filled with ice decorated with exotic flowers. There was also a map of our intended route for guests to view. Our first dance, Moon River. 2 drifters off to see the world. There's such a lot of world to see. Focus, chutzpah and bloody-mindedness will get you on your way, but you have to really want to go. We joined a rally which forced us to a deadline, essential if you want to escape the rat race. We were worried we did not have enough experience. The rally would be our safety net. After a 24-hour stretch to hit the deadline, we set off from the Hamble. It was a glorious morning and we were off to sail the world. As we passed the Isle of Wight, we grazed the keel over the shingles bank. Not a good start for a couple who just completed expensive navigation and sailing courses. From there, more engine failures, our crew jumped ship, and we missed the rally. But crazy or not, we kept going. Better late than never, we set off. After an overnight channel crossing, elated, we arrived under our own sail. Not a ferry or a plane, our own boat. The French courtesy flag was raised. We were gradually regaining our confidence, but not too much. We arrived in Camaret in Brittany with boiling batteries. When we set off again, there was more engine trouble, a broken gear lever which left us heading for the rocks. Despite a radio call for help, we were ignored by a French trawler, but saved by a change in wind. Challenge after challenge, we kept going. It's not easy to escape the rat race. We learnt to adapt. Waiting for repairs and spare parts gave us opportunities to see other cities, such as Seville. There's a saying, there are bold sailors and there are old sailors, but very few bold and old sailors. We waited for weather and waited. After 2 weeks, we crossed Biscay on an almost flat sea. As we headed from Spain to Portugal, our sailing know-how and confidence grew, and we felt watched over. Slowly we adapted from our London executive lifestyles to simpler, cheaper, slower life aboard. John's father was born in Gibraltar. Crossing from Spanish to Gibraltarian waters, John raised a huge Gibraltarian flag. It was a poignant moment. He had sailed from the UK to Gibraltar. John had inherited his father's flat in Gibraltar, which we also rented out. This was our bread and butter money. My Canadian cousins, Ashley and Emily, flew in to help us sail across the ocean. In Gibraltar there were parties, provisioning and more repairs. We met our fellow ralliers. Excitement and anticipation filled the marina. Gibraltar to Tenerife is 5 days and nights of non-stop offshore sailing. It was our first experience of open ocean. Halfway there, at 3 a.m. in the morning, 200 miles off Africa, we found ourselves bailing buckets of water, 20 buckets of water. Thankfully, it was not a leak. We noticed the water was hot. The problem was from the engine. We were not sinking. There was a crack in the water pump, which whilst rolling around in the ocean swell, we fixed. On our arrival in Tenerife, the four of us felt a great sense of achievement. We four had started our adventure. By now, the marina was full of sailors about to cross the Atlantic. There were more preparation, farewell parties and provisioning, such as a huge round of manchego. Fruit was washed to prevent unwelcome stowaways. We stored our fruit in nets. Once in the open ocean, these nets swung dangerously. My cousin Ashley coined the phrase, "death by cantaloupe." One night, we woke to the sound of running water. It turned out to be the onions rustling one against the other in the net. Before we set off, I found I was having palpitations caused by premonition. An Atlantic veteran put her arm around me and said, "It's the milk run, it'll be fine." My premonition proved correct. We departed into an improving situation. Gradually, the winds rose. We reduced sail to a storm jib. The winds rose and rose. A storm in Africa had clocked 180 degrees and was kicking into us. We don't have any pictures of the storm. We were too busy hanging on. The rigging began to scream. For 3 days and 3 nights we were thrown about the boat. I think Kit has an idea what this was like. It really felt like being in a tumble dryer. The storm intensified. The sound of the rigging and wind was almost unbearable, terrifying. The waves seemed as if they would engulf us. John and Emily were prostrate with seasickness. Thankfully, the hydrovane steering system kept us in front of the waves. The wind was gusting 50 knots. The only thing we could do was pray and hope. Finally, the storm began to abate. The wind died, the waves calmed, the violent rocking ceased. We acknowledged we had all been terrified. We began to surf down the ocean rollers. It was a thrill. We felt like children who'd just had their bicycle stabilizers removed. Here we were, surfing the ocean rollers. How cool was that? John was able to take off his oilskins and put on his sun hat. Most nights, just after supper, there was a squall, for which we took precautionary measures. In December, there are dozens of yachts crossing the Atlantic, scattered over hundreds of miles. The nearest land was 3 miles down. The nearest neighbours we knew of for sure were in the International Space Station flying overhead. We felt a great affinity for these astronauts. We were all far, far from home, in hostile, wide-open places. The night skies were utterly majestic. You felt you could peel the Milky Way out of the sky. By day 10, the rally was spread over 300 miles. Every morning there was a radio net during which every boat in the rally reported their position and the weather. Once the important business of the day was conducted, the radio discussion turned to fishing. who had caught what fish, at what speed, with which lure. We ran a dry boat, but we did have a halfway celebration. By the third week, we were content to keep sailing, keep going, keep going. On the morning of the 24th day, at 4 a.m., we saw a grey smudge on the horizon. As dawn broke, we saw Antigua. We clambered ashore, wobbly-legged and full of exhilaration. The customs officer was unimpressed with our achievement. In his hut of an office, everyone had sailed the Atlantic. The only real problems now were rum punch hangovers and mosquitoes. There were rival celebrations mixed with repairs and exploring the island. The rally went their various ways, but the bond of crossing the Atlantic together remained strong. John and I continued to make repairs to the boat as we had an extended honeymoon through the Caribbean. We still kept our costs low by anchoring, not staying in marinas. Travelling on local buses was cheaper and more fun. If we ate out, it was in local restaurants rather than tourist-centric ones. We had our one outfit for smart occasions, otherwise we were in shorts and t-shirts, if that. In April, the weather becomes less stable and lightning storms become more frequent. Hurricane season officially starts in June and officially ends in November. However, we were to discover that hurricanes do not keep to dates or borders. We sailed 2,000 miles north to the US to get out of the hurricane belt. The Intracoastal Waterway, the ICW, a highway for yachts and motorboats, is a series of rivers and canals, officially from Miami, 1,000 miles north to Norfolk, Virginia, opening into the Chesapeake Bay, where we anticipated spending a hurricane-free season. I saw a sign in Florida, "Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape." We had a saying, just because it's not going to the plan doesn't mean it's not going to the plan. At the beginning of September, to our horror, we discovered that a Hurricane Isabel, was tracking through St. Mary's, Maryland, where we were anchored. Expect the unexpected and learn to adapt. Time and again we learnt this. We secured a space in a marina then spent 5 stressful days preparing. Across the river, jets were flying out of the naval base. The Weather Channel was forecasting huge winds. Everyone worked together. One cruiser, whose mother had been dead against his trip, mused that she too was called Isabel. Isabel stormed through the Bahamas, came ashore in North Carolina, and headed up towards us. The winds and rains raged around us for several hours, and then all calm. So calm, John went to get a Chinese takeaway. Within 20 minutes, the storm blew up at full force. Here is John checking the boat. He was tied to the dock, and as the wind was now 75 knots. An electric substation blew, and it was too dangerous to stay out. Isabel was a huge storm which covered virtually the whole US East Coast. The storm raged most of the night. We woke the next morning to clear skies and fallen trees. Moonshine was high on the water from the storm surge, but all was intact. At the end of September, several boats head for the Bahamas or further south. For us, it was the Florida Keys, where we crossed to Cuba, which we explored from Hemingway Marina just outside Havana, then back across the Gulf Stream to Marathon Key, where we waited for weather to cross to Nassau. Finally, just before we left, we met Bahama veterans who guided us onto the Bahama banks, a tricky. The weather meant our only choice was to sail on Christmas Day. We set off on Christmas Eve and decorated the boat with Christmas lights. At midnight GMT, John put out a radio call wishing everyone Happy Christmas. Scottish, English, and Irish voices all came back. Early on Christmas morning, we dressed as elves and exchanged gifts with our fellow travellers. We then sailed into the Christmas Day dawn. On arrival in Nassau, we cooked Christmas dinner and watched It's a Wonderful Life. From Nassau south to Georgetown, Exuma. This is me in Honeymoon Bay, writing an article for Yachting Monthly. And this is Conception Island. Snorkeling is about the only thing to do there. So it was on to Big Sand Key near the Turks and Caicos, where we made a driftwood lion who watched over the whales mating on the Mouchoir banks. It became apparent that there is more to do than snorkeling on Conception Island. The whales were not the only ones mating. 10 days later, in Dominican Republic, we discovered we were pregnant. Over my first few months of pregnancy, we meandered through the island chain. Throughout our time away, we'd been careful with our spending. It was so much cheaper to live on a boat. We paid little, if anything, for water. Our gas and electric costs were small. Grenada, at the end of the chain, was considered by most a safe location during hurricane season. We anticipated returning 5 months later with our new baby. John kissed Moonshine farewell. He had a premonition we would not see her again. He was right. We did not see the boat again. Exactly 2 months before Jack was born, Hurricane Ivan seriously damaged Moonshine. Ivan zigzagged from St. Lucia south to Grenada, which had not been hit for several decades. Initially, the news was patchy. We were not sure if it was Moonshadow or Moonshine that had been wrecked. Then we received news from a writer who wrote for an American sailing magazine to which I contributed. Our first married home was damaged, seriously damaged. Grenada, the island that had been considered hurricane safe, was decimated. Smashed rings and broken yachts filled the pages of yachting magazines. It was an extremely stressful and depressing time. With the force of hurricane strength winds, the legs on which Moonshine was standing had gone through the hull. We had an ugly insurance battle and seriously considered whether we wanted to continue this life. But despite all this loss, we gained our precious son. We decided we would continue cruising, and we worked through the heartbreak of losing Moonshine and sorted out the insurance and found a new boat, a second-hand Moody 38 in excellent condition. Having sailed the west coast of Europe the first time, we decided to sail the Moody through the French canals. The canals are hard work in a yacht. Even with fenders and tyres around the boat, you really need a floating dodgem. From north to south, it's a total of 183 locks. We whooped with joy when we finally cleared the last lock and headed out into the open sea of the Mediterranean. We did not have the support of parents, friends and playgroups, but we did have time. Neither of us was working, so we both had time with young Jack when John was not fixing the boat. Here is Jack with the dolphins near Ibiza. From Marseille, we made our way to Gibraltar, where we discovered we were pregnant again. Our plans changed. Instead of crossing the Atlantic, we sailed east to Mallorca. After 18 months living on the boat in the Balearics, we shipped Seraphim to the Caribbean, spending Christmas in St. Lucia before exploring the Caribbean with our 2 young sons, a very different trip to the first. This is a mangrove safari in Marin, Martinique. Meeting the iguanas of the Bahamas. We travelled with other families, helping each other, whether by fathers looking after the children while mummies went shopping, or passage making. We would keep each other company on the radio during night watches. The children made friends with other children from many different nationalities and backgrounds. John took Jack on a high-speed dinghy ride around the pirate's lair in which we anchored near Exuma Land and Sea Park. James dived in the famous Thunderball Cave from the James Bond movie. Here is Jack's private beach, which came and went with the tide. We had time with our children, time as a family, time to bond. Travelling with other families really helped with what could be the best of times and the worst of times. Be it bad weather, or repairs to the boats, or bad children, or repairs to the children, or parents. We sailed through the highs and lows together, on every level. We decided spending hurricane season in the Caribbean on a boat was too risky with young children. All the way on the 3-month trip from the Caribbean, we hoped to see the space shuttle Atlantis take off in Canaveral. We made it with half a day to spare. The day after, we visited the NASA Kennedy Space Center. It was an extraordinary experience to see the space shuttle taking off, and the next day to be in the Space Center. A few months later in Washington, D.C., we met Buzz Aldrin. All the time we tried to expose the children to the world literally around them. From Washington DC, it was an arduous trip to New York. The highlights of that summer were seeing the space shuttle Atlantis take off and our entrance into New York. For $30 a night, we moored at the 79th Street Yacht Basin on the Upper West Side. But again, expect the unexpected. From New York, we took an unplanned trip up the Hudson River to the Catskills. We chugged at 5 miles an hour for 2 days, 100 miles to the hills, because of Hurricane Bill, the second hurricane in the first season we were back. And it hit New York, not the Caribbean or the Carolinas, but straight to New York and the Maritimes. We escaped Bill, but were back in New York for a lightning storm. The boat nearby us in this picture was hit by lightning, very serious for a boat. After the lightning storm, we decided Rhode Island and Maine could wait. We made it to Fort Lauderdale in time for the Christmas boat parade. This is Seraphim on the New River, Fort Lauderdale, where we spent Christmas and New Year before heading somewhere less busy, Bimini. Bimini is 54 miles across the Gulf Stream, an entire world away from Miami. As one Bimini resident said to us, "Ain't no time zone here." It seems a rundown place, but it soon works its magic on you. We'd coped with hurricanes and lightning storms, but we did not want to risk sailing through the pirate-infested waters of the Indian Ocean, now that they were beginning to attack private yachts, as well as commercial shipping. Reluctantly, it was time to return to the UK. The song goes, "Don't dream it, be it." John started his own successful yacht brokerage, specialising in blue water yachts, and our sons are happy at school. Almost as soon as we stepped off the boat, I had a call from the editor of my first magazine article, who commissioned me to write a how-to guide, an aspirational book. Sail away. It was published in December 2011, and in 2014, Fernhurst reprinted it. And to our delight, it has guided many people to sail away. And the second edition is out now. Alistair Buchan, who is the author of one of the other books here today, another long-time cruiser, wrote a phrase, "Membership of the Blue Water Cruising Tribe is for life, and there will be the ever-present knowledge that all you have to do to reach Narnia once more is to steer for the wardrobe." Thank you for joining us on this voyage through our years of cruising. I wish us all fair winds and a following sea.
Thank you, Nicola. Well, we're just swapping around the slides. Nicola's given you some idea of her voyage and the book. But it isn't just Nicola, and as she said, they didn't do the Indian Ocean or Asia, but Nicola has, I think it is 102 cruisers have contributed to this book. From Tom Cunliffe onwards. We'll leave it at that. I mean, it is an enormous corporate venture, really, this book. So, although you never made it through the Panama Canal, people who wrote in this book did and have made it right around the world. So it is a fantastic book, and I personally have a friend who, with this book, sailed across the Atlantic and is in the Caribbean now. So sailed across in December. So I know that it guides people. So that's that.